The whisper of Ravensodden awoke before dawn, when the world still tasted of frost and the last stars clung to the edge of the sky like scattered runes. The long hall behind him slept under a roof of shadow and carved bone. His one-eyed gaze, though, already scanned beyond walls, past the high fjords and frozen pines, to the soft hum of fate. It came not as thunder, but as a syllable, thin, insistent, like two wings finding one another in the dark. Hugin and Munin settled on his broad shoulders. One feathered head turned to the north, the other to the south. Between them, the air trembled. Their breath carried the scent of thawing rivers, burning peat, and whispers older than speech. Odin, Hugin murmured, thought, voice like the quicksilver wind that precedes a storm. There is a name on the lips of the world. Something moves beneath the skin of things. Munin, memory, croaked, a voice packed with the weight of winters. I saw a thread pull taut across 3 courts in one grave. The thread smells of iron and of ash. It runs through a man who would stand at the crossroads, and a woman who sings to the deep, and a child with no eyes who laughs like a door slammed by the sea. He rose, shouldering his cloak of twilight. Around him, the runes carved into the rafters hummed faintly, folding the past into the now. He felt the old hunger, not for blood nor for plunder, but for knowledge, that bittersweet draught he had sipped on Yggdrasil's roots. The raven call of fate thrummed in his bones. It was a summons he could not ignore. "Then we go," Odin said, and his voice was both command and prayer. "Bring me what you have seen." Hugin took flight first, an arrow of shadow racing toward the hem of the world. Munin followed, wings beating slow and steady like a metronome counting heartbeats. Odin wrapped his spear Gungnir across his shoulder, its haft carved with runes that smelled faintly of lightning. He would not ride Sleipnir yet. This was no battlefield for speed. This was a pilgrimage along the edges where memory clung like lichen. Their path first led to a town carved against a cliff, where the sea hurled itself into rocks, and the people drew their life from what the waters offered. Here, Munin landed atop a fisher's mast. He looked into a woman's eyes, a woman named Ire, who sang to the old nets and mended holes as if repairing the world. Munin fed Odin the memory of a chorus under the waves, a lullaby that pushed at the stones and made something beneath the floor of the sea listen. Ire's song, the raven remembered, was older than the witch's bargains and purer than the king's oath. It carried a key, a cadence of binding, an incantation woven from salt and breath that could keep a wound closed or open a forever door. Next, Hugin's wings carried them inland, where the snow still lay like white linen over the graves of men. There, a crossroads stood where 3 paths met under a single ash. A man, thin, a knitter of ropes and promises, stood with an axe on his shoulder and the look of a man who has long learned where his debts begin. Hugin fed Odin the thought of a contract signed with a small drop of blood, a bargain etched into a man's throat like a rune. The man's voice was crooked. His bargain was clever but fragile. The raven's thought held a warning like a shard of glass. Bargains bind more than bodies. They bind time and tilt the scales toward doom if left unchecked. Finally, they descended into a hollowed mound where a child of no name delighted in making tiny storms and puddles. The child, sightless perhaps, but not blind, laughed with a clarity that made the grass stand up on end. Munin's memory reverberated. The child's laughter was a bell rung at the center of being able to undo things that were sewn shut. In that laugh lay the possibility of rupture or repair. It could loosen the stitches in a king's crown or free a spirit trapped in a jar of glass. Odin listened to the twin report of thought and memory and felt the single thread all 3 held. A spool of fate being wound and unwound by careless hands. A war of small things, yet the repercussions would ripple to his hall and to the root circle of Yggdrasil itself. He tasted iron and salt and the tang of child's breath, and knew the shape of the coming choice. A village could be saved and a curse spread. A bargain could be honored while a soul wore the chain. A laugh could set worlds adrift. He closed his one eye and opened the other inwards, peering into his own well of knowledge. He sent his ravens once more, not as messengers, but as instruments of weaving. Let Hugin gather the threads of intentionality, men's plans and snares. Let Munin gather the knotted histories, those parts forgotten that remember themselves when needed. When they returned, each brought more than sight. They brought context, meaning, the subtle inflections of cause and cost. "Show me the turning point," Odin commanded. "Not merely what will happen, but when the choice will be offered." The ravens circled, high enough to thread the atmosphere like a needle through cloth. They dived and returned with a single image sharpened, a broken bell, a blood-stained ledger, a little hand opening the lid of a carved box. The events were not simultaneous. They threaded along a week of days. First the ledger would be read aloud in the hall where lawmen sat. Then the bell would ring out on a dawn mist and fail to toll. And finally the child would lift the box under a willow and, laughing, either release whatever slept within or bolt it away forever. Odin weighed the image in his mind. The ledger was the hinge, whichever way the men read it, truth or falsehood, mercy or cruelty, the bell and the box would follow as a chorus. The ledger could be altered, perhaps, but to alter it required someone who remembered the original letters in their true shape, not the softened lies that time tells. He thought of scribes, of old hands that etched letters in the margin at night. He thought of a woman with songs in her chest and a child who laughed like storms. He went first to the hall where the ledger would be read. There he took the guise of a wandering scholar, bent and robed in gray. Among the benches, men argued between the warmth of wine and the logic of law. A scribe sat in a corner, thumb ink-stained, trying to coax truth from cracked parchment. The scholar watched, waited. He knew that the scribe's memory was failing, that a certain line had been rewritten by fear, and that the original rune, a small twist of a letter, would change a sentence from pardon to condemnation. When the scribe left, Odin followed. He did not seal the ledger, though he could have. He sat by the river and spoke to the scribe in stories. Each story he told was a subtle teaching. He sprinkled them with hints of the rune's true shape, with metaphors that pried the mind from the fog. When the scribe's thoughts drifted to the lost letter, he felt a tug like a familiar scent. He came to believe he had dreamed the correct shape. He returned to the hall with his hand steadier and his eye keener. At dawn, the bell rang. It did not toll as intended. Its clapper hung loose, rust-gummed from neglect. Had it not been for Eyre's song wafting from the fishermen's nets, the bell's voice would have failed entirely. She stood by the bell tower and sang, and the sound of her voice lent the clapper momentum. The bell answered with a note that knifed through fog and woke a cart in the back lanes. The bell's ring, now whole, called the village to decision, and the ledger's truth was read for what it was intended to be, a corrective, not a condemnation. The child by the willow laughed as children must. Their hand found the carved box and paused. The lid trembled, and for a heartbeat the world hung like a coin. Odin could see the strands that would spill loose if the box opened, names, oaths, and a small bright thing that promised either salvation or wound. He might have snatched the box and secreted it away, closed the thread before ripples began. Instead, he stepped near, unseen, and let the child's fingers linger. The child opened the box. A puff of cool air smelled of deep, unplumbed things. It was memory of the world before there was a word for before. Inside lay a single bone-thin bell of carved ivory, a thief's token, and a scrap of paper with a single rune. The child laughed and did what children do, set the bell upon the grass and rang it. The tone, clear and impossible, made the little bell sound larger than mountains. It unlocked a sorrow in the hush of the air, but its sound also mended a root-bound knot in the earth and set a small healing in motion. Odin watched all this as a god watches a play written partly by his own hands. He did not intervene with thunder or decree. He nudged with story and song and quiet presence. A god who knows the danger of too much power must practice the harder art, subtlety. There were bargains upheld and bargains broken. Wounds opened and then cauterized by the right word at the right moment. The ledger ended not with a scaffold, but with a vote for a damaged man to make amends. The bell's clean note rallied mercy instead of rage. The child's laugh scattered a curse into a laughable heap of nothingness. When it was over, the ravens returned to him, feathers wet with sea spray and dust, eyes bright as polished coal. Hugin settled on his left shoulder, Munin on his right. Together they whispered the last details about what would change and what must be watched in future seasons. For even when the thread is rewoven, fate is not defeated, only redirected. New choices will sprout like shoots where old roots are cut. Odin listened and marked the places where he would need to bend his ear again. He lifted his spear and looked out across the world he tended. He had not done what many expected of a god. He had not forced an end with iron, but he had nudged the wheel with a feather, proved that thought and memory can steer outcomes if they are placed where mortals might reach them. The ravens preened on his shoulders, their whispers settling into comfortable silence. "Thank you," he told them. His voice carried neither pride nor penitence, only that weary, sharp gratitude a keeper of stories feels when stories are kept well. Hugin ruffled and cooed like wind through pines. Munin blinked slowly and offered him back the echo of what had been learned. In their joined silence lay a promise that the watching would continue, that the whisper of ravens would not be the last call, but the first step in an endless circle. As the light lengthened into day, Odin mounted Sleipnir not with haste, but with the steady gait of a traveler who knows many roads. He rode toward the next murmur. There are names he had yet to hear, bargains he must still weigh, songs that might one day stitch the world whole. Behind him, the village went on, a little wiser, perhaps, reliant on its own small mercies. Then somewhere beyond sight, fate bent toward a new pattern, not dictated by gods alone, but braided of human frailty and courage, song and ledger, bell and child. The ravens took flight again, eager and faithful, carrying thought and memory to wherever a whisper might become a turning.